Hello, Python coders. Here's a program that covers some of the concepts that we cover in Chapter 2, and you need to know these. As you can see, we're writing a cashier program. We're going to simulate what would happen if we buy multiple quantities of one item at a cashier station. Well, to plan that program and plan any program, you should write some pseudocode. Pseudocode is just ordinary English statements in which you describe the steps needed to solve a problem in order. So we're going to put these in an order, and then what we'll do is we'll examine these pseudocode steps here when we go to write the Python code. Now we're using the main function here, so I've got def main, that means define main. We're defining a function called main, open and close parentheses, and then we type a colon. And when you press enter after this line, you'll see that your cursor is indented right here so that your inputs will be tabbed in. They'll all be tabbed in. As you finish entering lines, the cursor will be on the next line tabbed in. So as you can see, we've got consistent indentation, and that's how Python determines what's inside the main function. All of these statements are indented consistently, so Python knows that those are the statements to execute when we execute the main function. Here we're just describing the main function. We're defining it. This is what actually executes or calls the main function. Just like this, print, for example, runs the print function. Well, this runs the main function, which we've defined up here. So let's take a look at the program code now. First of all, we're going to use the input function to get user input from the keyboard, and we're going to put a prompt inside the parentheses of the input function. And notice that the prompt is a string. That'll appear on screen when we run this program. And I've got a space at the end of the prompt string. And that's important because otherwise, whatever we type in will jam up against the letter E of name. Okay, and then that doesn't look good in the program output. When you type in your response here for the item name, it will be assigned to this variable item. So something that I always need to remember is that the input function returns a string. Whatever you type in is going to be a string. It'll be stored in the program as a string. Now we want to get, looking at the pseudocode, after getting the item name, we want to get the item price. So we use a float for that. A price has decimal places, right? It's a number with decimals in it. Well, that's a float in Python. So we don't want to use just input. That would give us a string, and we can't do any arithmetic with a string. So we use the input function embedded inside the float function. And you notice we have two closing parentheses at the end here. You got to watch for that. So we'll specify a prompt on the screen, which will ask the user to enter the price. We'll store that in a variable called price. The quantity, we're going to assume that in this case, it's something that we could count, so we're going to be having an integer quantity. So we're going to use the input function, and we'll embed inside that, we'll embed the input function. There's the entire input function inside the int function. That converts the string, which input gives us, into an int, which we'll store in the variable quantity. Okay, remember a string gives you, input gives you a string. If you want to get a float, you need to embed it inside a float function. If you want to get an integer or int, you have to embed the input inside an int function. Now that I've got those numbers, I can multiply them together. Again, looking at the pseudocode, right? This step right here in the pseudocode. We'll multiply the price times the quantity, store that in a variable subtotal. Now finally, we'll generate our output. And I thought what we'd do is actually summarize the transaction by specifying a number of different variables in an F string. An F string starts with the letter F, and then you open a string, in this case with an apostrophe, and we close it here with an apostrophe. And then inside the string, we type placeholders inside parentheses, curly braces, not parentheses, curly braces. And this is called a placeholder. Here's another placeholder. Here's another. And here's the last placeholder. We've got 4 different placeholders. And what we want to put inside those is the names of the variables that we wish to appear at that location in the output. So you can see we're going to print quantity here, item should show up here, and the price should show up here, and the subtotal should be over here. Let's give this a run to see how this works. So I'll run it with the F5. option here. And we'll just slide everything over so we can see everything. Okay, let's say I'm going to buy eggs. I'm at a supermarket, and maybe they're $2.49 a carton, and maybe I want 3 cartons. Well, look at that. It seemed to work okay. I got 3 eggs at $2.49, cost $7.47, and then I got a whole lot of decimal places. Well, you will get that when you're printing, often when you're printing the value of a floating point number, because the subtotal is also a floating point number, as obviously, since we've got a lot of decimal places here. So what we can do here is we can control this output a little bit better by typing a colon after the name of that variable, and then a point to F. And that means format it with 2 decimal places. And that should very much fix the output of this program. So I'm going to run it again with that change. Here we go. Run it one more time. This time I'll buy bananas. And maybe I'm going to buy 13, I'm sorry, the banana unit price of bananas, I'm not sure. I'm going to go with 49 cents. So I'll just type in decimal 49 then for the price of the bananas. But I'm going to buy a lot of bananas. I'm going to buy 24 bananas. And it turns out that that's 11.76. And now look at the output. I've got nicely formatted currency output with 2 decimal places because of the 0.2F. So when you're required to control decimal places with a placeholder as we are here, here's what you want to do. Inside the placeholder, the name of the variable that you want to format. Follow that with a colon. Follow that with how you want to format the decimal places. In this case, 2 decimal places as a floating point number. Okay, that's something you need to know about Chapter 2.